Welcome to our panel discussion, Pay It Forward Through Mentoring. I am Nav Dhaliwal, a graduate of the College of Social and Behavioral Science and a member of the Alumni Board of Governors. This event is brought to you by the Office of Alumni Relations. Our presentation today comes from our partners at the Professional Career Development Center on campus. They provide free career support for our students and alumni for up to 2 years after graduation. Please take advantage of this resource if you haven't already. You will not be disappointed. Today, I am pleased to introduce Sarah Kovalesky, who is the Assistant Director for Career Exploration and Curriculum at the Career Center. As a career coach and avowed introvert, Sarah knows how daunting the term networking can be for many students and of us. We're excited to have her share valuable tips to make networking a positive experience and a productive asset in your skill set. But before I turn the time over to Sarah, if you have any questions, submit them in the YouTube chat and we'll do our best to get to them in our Q&A session following Sarah's presentation. Sarah, welcome. The time is now yours.
Oops. Thank you, Nav. Thank you for joining me today. Hopefully you'll get something from this. Like Nav said, I'm an introvert. It's a huge part of my identity and how I show up in the workplace and in school and other things like that. And so with that, I'm gonna kind of share my screen and make sure you'll have access to this as well. But we're gonna kind of go through networking for introverts and a few tips to get started. So just so you know kind of what I'm gonna talk through today, society has kind of made introversion and personality, as well as like terms like networking, these really big, huge topics. And so first I want to kind of break those down and make them maybe a little less intimidating and approachable and manageable. So we'll talk about introversion as well as extroversion and kind of what introversion is, what introverts are not. We'll also talk about what is networking. We'll break it down. We'll go through kind of some tips, tricks, thoughts I have around networking as an introvert. I've got a ton of resources. I'll make sure you have my contact information. And like Nav said, we'll do some Q&A at the end. So feel free as you have questions to drop them in that YouTube chat. All right, so what is an introvert? You've probably seen a lot of this out there, but definitions and context are super important to me. And so I just want to take some time to go through them. So what is an introvert? Introverts are energized by spending time alone. Introverts avoid being the center of attention. Introverts tend to think and then act. Introverts think through things in their heads. They like to listen more than talk. They're more private. They prefer to share personal information with a select few. Often introverts keep their enthusiasm to themselves. They like to respond after taking time to think things through. Often introverts are drawn to work requiring solo activities or one-on-one contact, concentration, those type of things. Introverts can concentrate for long periods of time and may focus or like to focus on one activity in depth. Don't necessarily like distractions, can be very derailing. And also are attracted to careers where ideas are important. So hopefully, as I kind of went through that, maybe you found yourself being like, oh, that's me, that's me. And while we live in an extroverted world, and oftentimes I'm like, please stop talking sometimes to extroverts. It is important, I think, to kind of talk through what is an extrovert too, because of what we know about personality. So extroverts are energized by being with other people. They're comfortable being the center of attention. They like to act and then think. They tend to think out loud, talk more than listen. They're easier to read and know. They like to share personal information freely. They communicate with enthusiasm, respond quickly, enjoy a fast pace. They're drawn to work with high people contact. They like out-of-office activities. They like variety in their day. Extroverts might also enjoy other activities that can break off their concentration, like involvement in many activities. And they're often attracted to careers where action and interaction are important. And so you might have also found that as I read through those, some of those things are things that resonated with you. And so what we know about personality is that introversion and extroversion are preferences, and this dichotomy is on a spectrum. And so you're not just I or just E. Oftentimes you're somewhere in the middle. Sometimes we'll hear, oh, I'm an introverted extrovert. And that might be true for some folks, but oftentimes it probably just means that you're closer to one side than the other. If this is something that's super interesting to you, there's lots of free personality assessments out on the internet, like 16 personalities. You can also pay to take the MBTI through a variety of folks. It's offered at the Career and Professional Development Center as well. And so just something to kind of think about as we kind of move forward. Think about where you are. For me, I definitely am on very close to the I side of the spectrum when thinking about this dichotomy, but I also know lots of folks who tend to be more in the middle. And situations are also a really big part of this and can shape how we show up in spaces. All right, so an introvert is not. This is something I like to kind of take a few minutes to kind of just mention because I think there's a lot of assumptions or stereotypes or just notions folks have about introverts. And introverts are not necessarily a shy person. They might be, but not necessarily. Introverts are not someone who lacks self-confidence. Introverts are not inferior to extroverts. Introversion is not a synonym for antisocial. Introverts are not rude or dislike other people. Introverts are not someone that needs to be fixed or, someone that is not paying attention or engaged. I know I tend to be a little bit on the shyer side, I know myself. And I think one of the reasons why this topic is so near and dear to my heart and is important is because a lot of the times I think I've been in, whether it's a work situation or in the classroom, whatever it might be, being told, well, you're not talking, so you're not engaged. And oftentimes my head is spinning. I have a picture in my office where you have like the thought cloud that's like full of things, but nothing coming out of your mouth. And so for me, I think that's why this presentation is important because it really gets at, figuring out how do you use the skills you do have, because I'll say introversion is a superpower. And so, yeah, so hopefully, again, have a foundation for what an introvert is and what it is not. And what I would encourage you to think about is, what are some of the things that you've experienced when it comes to being an introvert that are not true? And think about, what did those situations look like? How did you feel in them? And kind of keep that in mind as we kind of think through some strategies for networking. All right, so breaking down networking. Networking is a term that I am not a huge fan of. It makes me like sick to my stomach. I think it's this word that we've really built up and we tell folks, well, you have to network to get a job or, things like that. And what I would encourage you, if that is a sentiment that maybe is something that resonates with you, try and look beyond the word. And so there's a lot of definitions out there. Here are a few common ones: to maintain relationships with people, to build up or maintain informal relationships, especially with people whose friendship could bring advantages such as job or business opportunities. connecting the dots, then connecting them, and then sharing the connections with those around you. Another one is networking is one of those things most of us think of as a chore and of an unloved task to undertake when we need something, a new job, better career guidance, more education, or other useful information. And then the last one I always include is networking as a reciprocal relationship that seeks to give and get advice, information, and referrals. So what I would encourage you to think about is, how do you define networking? Whether that's what you perceive networking to be, what society tells us networking is, whatever that might be, think about what it means to you. For me, networking is really just about building relationships and having conversations. I try and break it down as much as possible, and oftentimes will refrain from using the word networking. But why is it important? I think this is something that I hear a lot with students is, do I have to network? Like, is that a thing I really need to do? And I would say, as an introvert, unfortunately, yes. And there's, lots of reasons. A few, right? We change jobs a lot. The world of work has changed a lot just in the last 2 years and continues to change. And, kind of gone are the days where folks tend to stay in jobs for 30 some years. It's, what we're seeing. Job hopping starts young. We move a lot. More of us kind of work for ourselves. And then also connection and relationships are just part of being a human, even if they're kind of difficult right now in the midst of a pandemic. And so another thing I kind of want to talk about is why networking might be hard as an introvert. I think one thing that I love about working with people when it comes to careers is a lot of the times we don't have the language that we need to navigate the world of work or navigate networking. And so you might just know that networking is hard for you. And so hopefully some of these can give you some of that language and maybe name and validate that, no, networking is hard. The idea of like forcing an introduction or talking too much about myself, asking for a business card might go against kind of who we are and how we like to show up in spaces. Sometimes networking can be very overstimulating, whether that's like a career fair, whether it's like a networking event, lots of different environments that could be overstimulating. You might not like making small talk. You might not have enough time to think or process. This is a really big one for me. And kind of going back to defining networking, the term might not resonate and might feel kind of high pressure performative. That just, again, doesn't kind of match who you are as a person and how you show up in the world. So I'd encourage you to kind of take a moment, pause, and think about, what is difficult about networking for you? What are those things? And this might be where you have questions, right? Is, this is what I find hard about being an introvert. How do I kind of overcome that? All right, an introvert superpower. So introverts often, we live in an extroverted world, but I am a firm believer, and I will say it took me a while to get to this point, but I do believe that our personalities do provide us with a skill set that can be incredibly powerful when it comes to making connections and forming relationships. And a lot of folks who do a lot of writing and TED Talks and other stuff around introversion might even argue, and I kind of agree with them, that introverts have the upper hand when it comes to a number of characteristics in the networking setting. And that really, I think the three that stick out to me, and I kind of, when I talk about like introvert superpower, my three that really come up are listening, observing, and curiosity. And so again, I'm gonna have you think about, what are some of your introvert superpowers or strengths? What are those things that you bring to the table that, while you might not be the loudest person in the room, what are those other things that you bring to those conversations or those rooms or spaces, tables, whatever it might be? All right, so now to hopefully kind of probably why you came and where do I start? How do I network as an introvert? And so my first recommendation is going to be start with reframing networking, kind of like I've already alluded to and kind of talked about. Right, we go back to those definitions and kind of notes about quotes around networking and our feelings about it. Networking is really just about connecting with other people, and that's something that we know that we're good at. Sure, they might be at a big fancy event, but you get to decide how you show up in that space. And I think that's always something to kind of go back to is, yeah, this might be uncomfortable, but you also have a lot of the control in how you show up and how you have the conversation and how much time and those type of things. So a few strategies. The first one, seek out one-on-one opportunities. These types of interactions are just more comfortable because you're able to focus your energy on just that one person. And I think, when we hear networking, we also think like we have to find random people on LinkedIn that we don't know. And I would say start with people that you do know or people that you know and who they know, and start that way. It's kind of like sometimes when I talk to students, it's the kind of like the target, right? Where you have like a circle and then you kind of go out. So start with who you really know, and then who do they know, and then kind of go out from there. It doesn't have to be those kind of like cold contacts, I would call them. And if talking to someone sounds like way too much at first, start with a message or an email and go from there. You don't have to do everything all at once. And you might be like, well, how do I find people, or how do I know what to email or message? You can do those on platforms like LinkedIn or Forever Utah, where you might just ask connections a few questions or do what we would call like an informational interview or a curiosity conversation. There's lots of different names out there for them. I always like LinkedIn, and Forever Utah is great because it's specific to the U. I went to 2 very large schools, and I'm a big fan of leveraging your alumni network. You have a shared experience there, so why not use it and leverage it? And then it's not like a complete stranger. At least you have a shared identity of the University of Utah in this case. And so Forever Utah is kind of cool, and as always, I say like a really great stepping stone to LinkedIn. In that, like, I think sometimes folks are hesitant to open up another like social media account or something like that. And so Forever Utah is a little bit more contained, but you'll still have the opportunity to connect with people, ask them questions, ask them for support in whatever way you might need. And LinkedIn, one of my favorite tools on LinkedIn is called the Alumni tool, and we'll get to this a little bit later, but it's a great way to kind of find folks that are students and or alum at the university. But those one-on-one opportunities are probably the best, again, whether it's actual conversation or it's a message. Never underestimate the power of a message. And you'll have access to this that I'm going through after the fact. And so you'll notice there's some links in here. And so attached to this is a handout of like, what is an informational interview? And it has a ton of questions that you might ask. And so in those one-on-one opportunities, what's really cool about the handout that's attached is it breaks down different topics, whether that's just like about them or about the job or about the industry. There's lots of different questions. One of my favorite questions to ask is, if this job didn't exist, what would you do? Especially if you're kind of exploring or looking for a change. So it's one of my favorite questions. The next step or the next strategy or tip I have is, use your personality to your advantage. We talked about what are introverts and some of those strengths, those superpowers, I'll call them. Use those to your advantage. You're likely to have great listening skills and ability to focus. Probably also introspective and probably good at asking the right questions. So again, going back to that informational interviewing handout, find those questions that feel comfortable and use them. You can ask the same people the same questions. They don't know that. Plan and kind of know ahead of time. Networking rarely hurts you. It often only ever helps you. I always say to students, when you're on LinkedIn, if you send them a quick send someone you want to connect with a quick message, the worst thing that happens is they don't respond to you. Best case scenario, you get some questions answered, maybe build a relationship, and potentially that person helps you get a job in the future. The cons, in my opinion, the pros far outweigh the cons oftentimes. And also remember that you're not the only introvert. Sometimes it might feel that way, but you definitely have more folks out there than you know it. And I think the other thing to remember, and just I think about society in general, right? We see one thing, but there's always a lot behind that. And so, you might be used to someone being super talkative and stuff. But then, when they leave work, right, like me, I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to find ways to recharge, that kind of stuff. So introverts are out there, find them, connect with them, and know that tend to always root for each other. So the next one, LinkedIn in the virtual world. So I've kind of already talked a little bit about LinkedIn and also Forever Utah, but a lot of networking can be done completely online and virtually, especially as we continue to navigate the changing world of work going into the third year of the pandemic. Getting connected to people you know and have them connect you to people they know is honestly one of the best ways to get connected. Spend time making sure that what you want out there in the virtual world is what you want. Remember, you don't have to start connecting with folks until you're ready to. And like I said, leverage that university alumni network. There's a lot of power in that. There's a shared experience and understanding, similar classes, those type of things. One of my favorite tools on LinkedIn, and again, when you get a link to this, you'll be able to access these buttons here. You'll kind of find a video that we have at the Career and Professional Development Center about navigating LinkedIn, and the video will kind of break down all the big components of your profile, whether that's talking about the summary or how to include experiences, volunteering, courses, all of that on LinkedIn. There's also a checklist I've provided that LinkedIn puts out about the different parts of a profile. And then there's also a link to the alumni tool. LinkedIn has become very user-friendly, very intuitive. If you don't have an account, or if you have an account but haven't really put a ton on there, LinkedIn will encourage you to continue to fill it out and kind of help you fill it out, which is really nice. So there's a lot of different resources. That alumni tool I mentioned, again, is going to be very similar to Forever Utah. And there's the way you access that is you'll actually go to the University of Utah's page, where you can go to any university university or college, and there'll be a menu, and you'll click Alumni. And what it'll do is it will pool the 95,000 alumni and students that are on LinkedIn that are affiliated with the University of Utah. And it will put them all into one place for you. And it'll actually filter them between where they live, where they work, what they do, what they studied, what they're skilled at, and how you're connected to them. And so this is a really great tool for exploring, making transitions, seeing what people are doing with different degrees. Again, tapping into that alumni network. Forever Utah is going to be very similar, except it's just for you folks. And the number of people are going to be fewer on that platform. But what I always tell students is you probably have a higher chance of getting a conversation going on a platform like Forever Utah, because the folks on there want to help each other out. And so that's really the cool thing about that U of U specific space. In addition to kind of LinkedIn, there are lots of other ways you can network online, both events, using sites like Meetup. You can find networking events there. Also, sometimes I hear from students that they, network on Instagram and stuff like that. It's not something I personally have ever done, but I have taught classes where that's how students have done their informational interview, and I've actually learned a lot from it. So it also just depends, what are you looking for? What types of information are you looking for? Who and how do you want to get connected with folks, and kind of go from there. So kind of knowing your purpose and intention is super important when you are navigating kind of the virtual world and social media. So the next tip I have is be intentional at in-person events. And so I know in-person events are starting to make a comeback. I know we'll have our career fairs the next 2 weeks through the Career and Professional Development Center on campus. And one of my favorite quotes from Susan Cain's Quiet rule of thumb for networking events: one new honest to goodness relationship is worth 10 fistfuls of business cards. And this goes back to, what we know introverts are good at, and that's building relationships, those one-on-one interactions. That one person, again, I would say it only takes one, right? Whether it's a job app, a person, whoever it might be, follow up. Don't be afraid to ask questions, and work on that relationship. Also, when it comes to in-person events, I think the biggest piece of advice I can give is pick times when you'll be at your best. If you're not an evening person, look at something over the lunch hour. If you're not a morning person, look for something later. Start with research to know who you can expect to be there, who you want to talk to, the logistics of the event. Right. So if you're looking to attend our career fairs next week, you can go into Handshake. You can see all of the employers who will be there, and you can kind of do a little bit of research. You might even apply before you even go and use that recruitment piece, the in-person piece, as a kind of almost as a follow-up. You get to pick how you navigate that space, but research can definitely help with that confidence or nerves that come with, I'm going to be talking to a bunch of people I don't know, talking myself up, that elevator speech pitch that is like one of my worst nightmares when it comes to networking. Practice it, know it, and also remember that in-person events, especially career fairs in this case specifically that I've been talking about, this is their job, is to talk to people. They're used to talking to folks. It's not completely your responsibility to hold the conversation and lead it. There's always two people in a conversation or potentially more. Definitely get there early, allow yourself time to like breathe, talk, give yourself a little pep talk, and then go into the event, whatever it might be. Bring a friend or attend knowing that you'll know someone else. I always find extroverts are always willing to bring their introvert friend along. And I do take advantage of that. This is an odd tip, but look for odd numbers of people in groups. Then that way you're not like completely paired off or anything like that. Set a realistic goal for yourself. You can say one thing, but also know, what's actually going to be realistic for you. And it doesn't really matter what is other people are doing. Focus on you and what's going to be best for you. Kind of going back to that quote I started with, aim for quality over quantity, right? You could talk to, if you're again at a career fair, using that as an example, you could talk to every recruiter there. But that might not lead to anything if you didn't take time, make a connection. It might not necessarily matter. And then, one thing we're good at, take the time to follow up afterwards, those type of things. You can do a lot before and after to make an in-person event successful. The next one, recharging and self-care. So I know, again, been in the midst of a pandemic. I feel like taking care of yourself, self-care are things that we hear kind of all the time, but for introverts, when it comes to networking, find ways to fill back up that cup. Plan ahead, plan before to know all right, how am I going to take care of myself after this? Knowing I've put myself out there, I've probably had conversations, I'm going to be tired, whatever that is for you. For me, it's escaping into a book. I'm a big reader. Again, whatever it is, know that and make sure to schedule time afterwards for it. Kind of going back to, that realistic goal idea for in-person events, be strategic and know your limits. It might take time to learn those limits, but, learn what does work and what doesn't work for you. And then kind of the last tip I'll kind of throw out there is own your introversion. Easier said than done, I know, especially in an extroverted world and in a world that often rewards extroversion. Own it. And again, it takes some time and practice. You're very, very much in control of what you do and what you do not do. So though I'll always encourage folks to push themselves and kind of go a little bit out of your comfort zone, but know that only you know when you're ready to do that. And also be proud that you're an introvert. The world of work needs you in it. This is something I learned, I think sometimes the harder way in different workspaces. And I'm lucky to work in a workspace now that allows me to do workshops like this and create spaces for introverts because they don't often exist. And so find ways to own your introversion, be proud of it, but also know that it might take some time. And then I'd also think about, what are some other strategies that might have worked for you that are not on this list? And my email will be at the end. Please let me know what other things have worked for you. I'd love to hear those. And then I have a bunch of resources. They're all linked here. So again, you'll have access to this. Take the Work Out of Networking, a guide to making and keeping great connections. This is a book. I'm not in my office, so normally I would pull it up and share it, but it has a whole section on being an introvert and definitely a great read. If you have not read Quiet by Susan Cain, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, it is a wonderful read. I highly, highly recommend it. Also get a copy for your extroverted friends and make them read it. There's a really great newsletter called Quietly Visible that I like on LinkedIn. And then I've also included, again, Susan Cain's Power of Introverts, her TED Talk, Carol Stewart talking about introverts making great leaders as well. Another big kind of going to assumptions around introverts and what we are not. Introverts can also be leaders. And I will kind of leave you with this. Remember, at least 1/3 of the people we know are introverts. They are the ones who prefer listening to speaking, reading to partying, who innovate and create but dislike self-promotion, who favor working on their own over brainstorming in teams. Although they are often labeled quiet, it is to introverts that we owe many of the great contributions to society, from Van Gogh sunflowers to the invention of the personal computer. So you can network and you can be a rock star at it. I always provide my contact information, whether you're just getting started with networking or you're looking to find a new way to do it. I'm happy to be your first connection and happy to be your 500th connection, whatever that might be, whether it's today or a few months from now. Know that I'm always willing to connect and support whatever that might be. So thank you for kind of going through that with me. And I guess we'll kind of open it for questions.
I just wanted to say, yeah, thank you for sharing that valuable information, Sarah. That was extremely insightful. And as Sarah mentioned, we're now going to swiftly move to our Q&A session to get to as many questions as we can. So our first question is, any tips or advice for the introvert, mature, seasoned, older job seeker?
I think now, again, kind of going back to this, networking has become this massive term that's become very loaded and intimidating. And I think just finding ways that are comfortable, especially in this very tech-savvy social media world that I think we live in and being very virtual right now, find ways that are comfortable to you. Ask folks to look at your profile. If you're nervous sending a message to someone, find someone who can read it ahead of time. Just find like simple, small ways to kind of build up. You can't do all of this overnight, and it's super unfair to expect of yourself to do it all overnight. And so I would say, whether you're a sophomore in college or you've been out of college for a while, just find small, meaningful ways to feel like you're, I hate to say like getting stuff done or being productive, but just look for those small ways, because networking is going to look different for everybody. So just find the ways that are most comfortable. I don't know if that fully answered it, but that's what I'll say.
Appreciate that, Sarah. So question number 2, any tips for remembering names or personal details of those you meet? I sometimes dread awkward follow-up meetings if I have trouble remembering important details about someone I've met.
Yeah, I would say find a system that works for you. I have like a spreadsheet I use. So if I'm not a big in-person event person, that's like my last resort networking event. But I will try and if it's someone I want to reconnect with, or I know there's going to be follow-up with, I will kind of write down my big takeaways from the conversation, where they work, what they do, how I met them, whatever that might be. And I just have a spreadsheet that I've collected over the years. And anytime I connect with them again, sometimes I'll go back into the spreadsheet and put the last time I've talked with them. So that's one way. If you're messaging on LinkedIn, those messages are in there. If you're at an in-person event, like a career fair, I'm someone who I'll talk to someone and then I will leave where all the recruiters are, and I'll write down their name, what I want to follow up on, like details like that. And then I'll go back and talk to the next recruiter I want to talk to. Again, everyone's going to be different, but I would find a system that works for you, whether it's a spreadsheet, notebook, LinkedIn, whatever that might be.
Yeah, and to add to sort of what Sarah said, and just on a very similar note, so I utilize Evernote, and after every interaction I have with somebody new, I'll go into Evernote and I'll as Sarah mentioned, input the key takeaways from that conversation. But I would also challenge each of you, when you meet somebody new, ask them about their personal interests. Ask them about potentially things that are valuable to them or things that are important to them, because when you do follow up, you could potentially include a message that that touches them or that's more sincere to them. So that's the only thing I'd add to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite questions. I think I mentioned, one of my questions, like in informational interviews around like, if this job didn't exist, what would I do? Whether it's an interview or networking, I always ask folks, what keeps you coming back to work?
Right.
Passion, excitement, those things are really big values of mine when it comes to work. And so finding questions that get to the more personal things that you can then use kind of intentionally and strategically and following up, those are the things that make a difference.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And I would even say, to take that even maybe a step further, I would say, when you're able to talk about things that are even outside of work, even if it's just slightly, whether it's on the realm of personal interest, I feel like it makes the conversation a little more interesting. It makes that person a little more inclined to wanting to get to know you. Because if you have that common ground in interest, obviously people are more likely to be connected to one another. And so for our third question, you touched on this in your presentation, but maybe you want to elaborate more for our the person who submitted this question. It says, are you going to address networking via social media? So I think you addressed that, but how networking online works. So you want to just maybe go into a little more detail in depth on maybe LinkedIn and how you'd go about an interaction with somebody you don't know, maybe somebody you want to get to know?
Yeah, with LinkedIn, I think there's a lot of different ways you can use LinkedIn and leverage it, whether it's just like a quick question about the field, or it's you find someone who's in a role that maybe you someday would like to be in. In those initial connect messages on LinkedIn, you are kind of limited to, I think it's like 300 characters. But something as simple as, I'm a current U student, or I'm also a U alum. I saw you have X, Y, and Z experiences, was wondering if I could talk to you a little bit more about them. Again, kind of going back to, where you're at and what you feel comfortable with. You can kind of use that to get started and start that conversation. Again, LinkedIn is my go-to. I also use a few of my alumni network websites, just like you all have Forever Utah. So again, Forever Utah, I think is a really great first step, because the people on there want to help you, want to connect with you, want to connect you with other people. And so again, those initial messages, finding that shared connection, whether it's a major, whether it was a club you were both involved in, right? When you're on Forever Utah, when you create your profile, you can actually add like, I think it's classes and clubs, organizations, volunteer experiences. You can share all of those things that you've been involved in. So when you are looking at people, you can see those shared things. Again, kind of going back to the last question, leverage those interests, leverage those personal things, because that's what people are going to remember.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sarah. And, my girlfriend, she's an introvert. And one of the things that she does, and maybe you can elaborate on this, Sarah, is she says that, in regards to public speaking, when she has to speak in class or when she has to, one of the things that helped her dramatically is, rehearsing before class, just asking random strategic questions, or, maybe questions on the topic that could have been, questions. Do you know anything about that, or could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I probably practiced this like 3 times this morning. Probably not that much, but I think there's definitely this, I think the same with interviewing too. I always caution folks, don't like over practice, because you definitely can over practice, right? If you get like a certain like speech in your head and then you stumble, right? Then you're like, oh no, it's over. I screwed up. I can't move forward. Right. So I think you have to like find a balance between, what, like being prepared and not being over prepared. But it definitely, I think it like time, and the more you do it, it becomes more comfortable. Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it's all about like, I never write things out. It's always like bullet points. So I don't get in that, oh, did I miss something mentality? And I think that you can even, if you're at an in-person event, you have like a little Padfolio or something like that with you, you can have those points with you. You can glance down at them, or you can glance down at them before you go talk to someone, or before you do a presentation or a speech or whatever it might be. There's lots of little things. And again, you all know yourself best, but find those little things, because those little things then kind of start to build the confidence. And then these things don't seem so scary, but I don't know that they ever are not scary. So
Right, but as you mentioned, when you practice, you become a little more comfortable, and then as you get more reps under your belt, you become more familiar with different scenarios, different situations, and different presentations, and I think that's incredibly valuable information. Thanks so much for sharing, Sarah. And I think that's actually it for our questions today. And so I want to say, thank you to our panel for sharing, their valuable experience, and thanks to our alumni audience for being here today. To wrap this up, we'll be sending you an email with a link to a recording of this event to share with friends or colleagues, as well as, the resources mentioned during this session. Thanks again to our panelists and to all of you watching today. Stay safe and go Utah.